Why it's important is we need to raise the bar and basically show that our network provides different classes of storage, even if it's only one class. These are just some graphs that have come off the internet. You can look them up. AWS has storage classes. GCP has storage classes. Theirs tend to be more simplistic. I think it's a model to copy. We did talk about this as like, what is an SLI, an SLO? What leads to an SLA? There are teams building certain portions of this. We're going to hand off the microphone. We're going to get into that. But what I want to cover is what differentiates these storage classes just at a high level in case you don't know. You can also come to me, but I want to cover this briefly. As a whole, most of what comes up is your time to first byte. It's as you move from hot to archive, it tends to be a higher number, except for in GCP's case, which I think actually fits us more as well, because we tend to be a spinning disk-like infrastructure. It's mainly HDDs. It's mainly 7,200 RPM disks. It's mainly on some type of JBOD with a 10 gigabit connection. It's not running 100 gig or anything that fancy. Not that that's necessary. The blocker is usually the internet pipe coming in. Deal duration tends to determine the class as well, even though it might be the same infrastructure at the bottom level as well, being the HDDs. They just change the deal duration to change the storage class. And then price, as you go from hot to cold, tends to look something like $25 a month without retrieval fees, or somewhere around $15 for R2, and then going as cheap as $1 a month on AWS and Azure because they're selling tape. And then most of these tend to be object storage, at least in the ones that I'm talking about here. Now, what's going on in our ecosystem, if you don't know, we have a series of teams that are working towards getting this information public and on-chain. I'm going to hand it off to Steve here in a minute. But we have Spark. They're building the SLIs against target SLOs, and they're, yes. And, right.
Yeah, but they're going to build many. I think they're going to build several. I think so.
Yeah.
They're going to build many. I'm not going to build all.
They're going to
build many.
Station here as well, which I run a station node on my other Mac Mini and it's set up to reboot automatically, so I'm always on the network. We do need to talk about station nodes running in China at some point. And then we've got the Fiddle team that's going to be using this information for their allocation path. Then I'm going to hand it over to Steve here. Steve has done a great job picking up some of the slack on just getting all these teams together, advertising what's being done, and then tracking it and driving it home to really a deliverable, which is amazing. So thanks again on that, Steve.
Okay, to switch over. Okay, perfect. Thanks everybody. Real quick on me. Yeah, I have previously got to do some work with IPFS and libp2p. Newer here helping out with the SLOs team, but I just want to say I'm by no means a Filecoin expert and not the oracle on any of this. More of just been helping bring some people together to see what we can do to make some of this stuff more concrete in terms of defining service classes and objectives, and doing that hopefully in an open source way. So I think a lot of the background for this has already been covered, right? Storage clients have a diverse set of needs. That's been enumerated. That's why providers like AWS, GCP, etc., have created a plethora of storage options. And currently, Filecoin doesn't necessarily articulate clearly what are the storage classes that are supported, how we define them, and how the network is doing against those. And so this, I believe, was a topic of discussion in the last FilDev Summit. Some folks started getting together to work on that. We've been creating what we've been calling the PMF targets working group. It's not the group that's responsible for PMF, but helping just define some targets so we can see how are we doing on the road to PMF. So that's what I'm kind of here representing. That that working group does meet in the open. There's the Luma link to it. We've been meeting a couple times a week the last 4 to 6 weeks to see, hey, what can we pull together with the data that's already on chain, so we could hopefully have something to show for this for this meeting. A couple of things I'll say. I think these terms have been thrown out. I just quickly hit them and what they mean, right? You'll hear the word SLI or service level indicator. This is really a metric. It doesn't tell you whether you're good or bad. It's just a particular metric that is being produced. Then you'll have a service level objective where you're now tying an SLI to a given threshold to see are you above or below a line. And then a service class would be a collection of these service level objectives, right? So that's the relationship between all of these. I think Juan also brought it up, service level agreements or SLAs. That is a legal agreement. This is where another party could potentially come after you. We're not going to be using that. I tend to stay away from that term, and just because it's too narrow, where we're going to more focus on service level objectives. And also for those in the storage space, a group like S3 has an SLA, but they don't have SLA on one thing, and it's a well-defined thing that you can go after them for, but that's not by any means the full set of capabilities that their service offers. And so that's why just kind of avoiding that term. So just a couple of things to be clear on in terms of how we've been approaching this problem, right? Anything we're working on, it has to be on chain. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, it's a forcing function to actually do it, right? If you start cutting corners to begin with, then it becomes hard, despite the best intentions, to actually do it later. So we've really focused on that. And obviously, there's great benefits that we get from having on-chain data, as in the immutability guarantees, etc. Another thing we've been taking to heart, which hopefully you see in some of the work we're going to show, is that all the rules of the game should be knowable and easily discoverable. You might not like the metric, but you should at least understand what the metric is, what it does measure and what it doesn't, know where the data comes from, so there's no surprises for you as an SP or whoever is looking at this metric. So really want to make sure things are very well defined, and that's actually taken up a lot of our time, is being very crisp about this. Also, again, there's a lot of exploration going on. We don't want to gatekeep on what things to explore, but we do want to make sure that if we're going to start publishing a metric, that the quality is high. Allow lots of metrics to be out there, but at least that we are documenting well what is happening. And another aspect too is making room for alternatives. And so I think Spark's been brought up multiple times. The Spark team does a great job talking about how it's the Spark retrieval success rate. There might be other ways of measuring retrieval success. Spark has developed one protocol for that. We have that well defined, but if you see an opportunity for something better, it should get developed, and we shouldn't be name squatting on like this is the one and only way. So with those in mind, I'm going to switch over to kind of what we set out to do, and then can show you kind of where we've gotten to so far. So, and this is basic, but is more intended to get a framework for how we could start defining some things for the network, and then layering in additional service classes and additional SLIs. So you can imagine we're just looking at the network as a whole, looking at how many SPs, for example, have taken deals or have active deals, and then starting to look at how our SP is doing against a certain service class. And for now, I'm trying to show that there are multiple service classes. So we have, quote, warm and cold. Those aren't the names that we would use. I think, some of the examples that Juan had of, Web3 object storage, Web2 object storage, etc., are probably better fits, but those are just in quotes as placeholders that you could potentially have multiple service classes that you're looking at across the network. And then within that service class, ideally you're hitting all of the SLIs. And realizing this isn't, get this a little bigger, make that look clearer. Ideally, you'd be meeting all of the service level objectives for a given service class, but you may not, and so we'd give some visibility to that. And then similarly, I should take a step back. The goal here, obviously, you need to start with something, and we're trying to focus on how do we start facilitating a market between on-ramps and data aggregators and storage providers, right? So those on-ramps and aggregators can find potentially good storage providers to work with on the back end, and so storage providers can know how they're being evaluated. So that's what this initial dashboard is trying to go after. And the key thing is that we would then start enumerating all of the storage providers and how they're doing against a set of metrics. From there, then being able to click in and see, okay, how is this how is the SP with ID ending in 920 doing against whatever service classes have been defined. And this is looking across multiple service classes. Now I'm digging into the warm service class, and I can see the days in which I was conformant for our durability SLO or a retrieval SLO, and then more specifically, actually getting down to the graphs. So in this case, I'll go down to retrievability, for example. Let's say we had set a target of spark retrievability of 0.95. That's the red horizontal line going across here. And then you would see how that was being measured for this particular SP. So it becomes very clear for the SP and for potential users of that SP how they're performing against whatever SLOs we have defined. And yeah, again, we would show multiple service classes. So now I'm into the quote cold, and then also have additional graphs about just what's the general activity of this SP, etc. So that was kind of what we sketched out, and this working group was trying to see, okay, can we actually start building some of this and create a framework in place where we would define these things, so we'd have something to iterate on. So you can check this out now. It's filecoin-project.github.io/Filecoin storage providers market. So this is only using data on chain. All the data is coming from the Filecoin. The Filecoin data portal with David Gasquez's help set up. And you can see we're starting to get into some general. What's the size of the network in terms of SPs? How are we doing against certain service classes? This is only right now. We only have one metric that is only one SLO that we're looking at right now, which is Spark retrievability. But we, in this effort, all of the Spark work is now on chain. So there is a smart contract you can query to get a daily dump of retrieval success rates for every SP that they check. And so the Filecoin data portal is pulling that data on a daily basis, which has been powering this backend. And we're just right now that retrievability SLI from Spark really only makes sense for customers that are keeping a unsealed copy of the data, which is putting in our quote warm service class, which is why there's nothing here under cold at the moment. And as Juan also mentioned, the kind of on the durability side of proofs of space-time, we do have that all specced out in terms of how we would get that data. We just haven't pulled that into the Filecoin data portal yet. But yeah, here again, this is taking an active list of providers on chain. And let's see if I open one of these up. It should load. This is all static generated sites. So, okay. Again, so now starting to get, here we're looking at the retrievability measured by Spark for this particular SP. And again, anytime we're showing a rate or percentage, we're always going to be showing the accompanying request count. So you know how to, you know how many data points were behind it. Again, we haven't done anything on the durability side, and then there's a lot of other storage provider activity metrics that are thrown in. So this is where things are at today. A key, like I think what we said, one of the tenets was that you should be able to discover, okay, what does this mean? So for example, I guess coming back here, so let's go learn about the warm service class. Oh, I'm sorry. Switch over to the GitHub. So, sorry, there is a GitHub repo, Filecoin-project/service classes, which is an attempt to start formalizing definitions for the SLIs and service and the service classes themselves, which again is a collection of SLIs with their target values. So that's here, and so we've started to get that documented. Right now, again, a lot of this is just placeholders, but okay, here's the warm service class. If I open this new tab, great. Yeah, and again, we don't have much data on chain that we're pulling, which is why there aren't many SLOs. But again, this is just placeholder. But we're saying we have for the quote warm service class, there is a Spark retrieval success rate. Again, none of the thresholds or anything are defined yet. We're just placeholder value of saying 90% per day. And also we're needing, if we're looking at the quote sector health rate, which is again where we're looking at proofs of space-time every day per sector, what the threshold is value for that. But this would be the place to define it, have the discussion as to why these values were chosen, who actually cares about it, etc. So we have that. And a key part here is something like Spark retrieval success rate. If that's something you want to learn about, we have all the nitty gritty as to what does this measure? What are the steps of what's going on the back end? How would you actually verify all of the results? And a key thing we're trying to do here is be really clear about like how can you game this metric? What are the holes with it, et cetera? All of that is being laid out so it's clear, what you do and don't get with it. So that's where we're at today with this endeavor. I would say some things that are coming next, or where we can really use some help. Right. Obviously, again, none of us in the working group are claiming to be experts here. And so how do you have a process where somebody can propose a new service class or change, a threshold value in a service class? So kind of that improvement proposal process is something we need to get fleshed out. We've had some conversations, but haven't actually documented that to start. Because, some people that have kind of started catching wind of this have been like sending me DMs, et cetera. And it's like, hey, I'm not the arbitrator here. I need to have a place to have a public discussion on that. And that's some of what we need to get created. Like I said, we've got fill-in names like warm, cold. I've had feedback on like, hey, what Filecoin is doing with proof of space-time isn't really durability. We should use a different term. Like, great ideas. We need to like get that stuff actually named so it's not just in limbo. Setting the actual thresholds that we would want to see. And again, right now we're only showing Spark request retrieval success rate because we wanted to see that get on chain. But again, getting things like the sector health rate, et cetera, are some of the things that are coming next. So that's where that's at. Again, this working group's been meeting once or twice a week. Love to have you be involved or come stop and talk with me. Again, I'm just representing one of multiple people involved here. And again, we made a push to get this stuff on GitHub so that people can open issues, create PRs, or start having a discussion so it's all in the public. So that's what I'll say. Any questions on this?
Over there. Coming.
Sorry.
It's a long run, sorry.
Let's go first. You want to go first?
So if I'm an SP and most of the revenue that I'm generating is outside of, it's not in-band to Filecoin networks, I'm leveraging Filecoin in the back end and I'm doing other things on the front end. Why would I voluntarily participate in Spark metric scraping of my infrastructure when every request for a retrieval test or something like that is in effect going to cost me money? So how can you, and I'm being deliberately antagonistic on this because I still believe in the value of these tools, but as a third-party audit of an SLA that's signed between me and my clients and my customers, I really want a third-party audit agency. I'm less than fully inclined to randomly participate in a heartbeat or a pacemaker or random audit that every time it runs, other than having a warm fuzzy for contributing data to the network, I'm not generating revenue from it. But as a compliance measure for my SLAs that I've agreed to a customer, that's would add value. And also the customer would have the opportunity to pay for that verification.
Yeah, I think sorry, you can answer first.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I would say is the intent is to eventually get these things driving incentives and rewards, right? I think there was discussion earlier about how the network is paying a ton for block rewards, and what are we getting in return? I think there's a hope that with time we would get smarter about how we are, what we are paying for and what we get in return, and so you could imagine a different multiplier based on if you actually provide retrievable data.
Also, you could flag that all data that is right now participating in Phil Plus program is hot data. That is a parameter of the Filecoin Plus program, that all data gets marked with like fast retrieval. That's how the network was originally configured. That's the parameter for that program right now. And so if you are selling storage, you're using Filecoin on the back end, but you are selling it to clients separately outside of Filecoin, you shouldn't be getting a block reward multiple for that. And so you would, great, you can still use Filecoin for committed capacity sectors at that point, but you wouldn't be getting any Filecoin block reward multipliers or incentives as a client. And if you are storing it with Filecoin, and you're committing to your SLA to your clients on Filecoin as a chain, then we need something, which is this same thing as your third-party auditor service, which is our measurement as a network of, are you meeting the client SLA that you have said? The things that I think are still missing within that to get it crisp enough is, right now we have the, fill plus or not fill plus is like the is it hot data or is it not hot data? I would like to see that more clearly delineated of like which SLA tier or which service class are you having in the deal itself, which then can opt you into different tiers of checking to measure whether you audit, whether you are meeting that service class tier and that you are selling within the Filecoin network, and then the network might offer you different rewards based on the tier of service class that you're serving. But to me, I this is an audit system. It's not just for fuzzies.
It's conditional participation on Fill Plus. If it's conditional terms and conditions of being able to receive Fill Plus, that seals the deal on the game theory that makes it worth my time. Again, I'm being deliberately antagonistic to question it to the void and trying to figure out ways that make these things self-sustainable, because I see tremendous value, particularly in the context of enforcing a contract SLA with a particular client. I need this third-party agency to verify, independent of me saying,
Why?
"Yeah, I got it."
Why do you need a third-party agency versus a Spark retrieval service that is measuring and giving metrics on chain? What is the agency? I don't understand.
The end result is it is a metric or is it measurement that is outside of my sphere of influence.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a, if you will, a gentleman's agreement that, yeah, sure, I've got your data. Not only am I proving the immutable, cryptographically sealed copy of it every 24 hours, I'm also participating in real retrieval efforts every 24 hours, and I can't tweak the outcome of that. An entity independent of me is doing this. Now, if I'm not relying upon that for my primary source of revenue, then I really wouldn't want it crawling around doing random retrievals. And that, in those conditions, then the network monitoring is not getting an accurate picture of the performance of the network because I'm not participating in these audits. So again, I'm questioning to the void, trying to find the underlying game theory to make this self-sustaining, not only self-sustaining, but deterministically valuable to end users. And that end users got to be the one that's going to pay for it eventually.
Yeah, I had the similar question, but actually, like, for me, success coming out of this week would be to have a clear process and path for us as an L2 to test this, because I think this is so crucial, but not just crucial, we have to like actually advocate it and test it before we start proposing a new fit, because we all know it's really hard to come in and say, hey, we're going to change the tokenomics, which we have to do, in my opinion. So everything you're saying, I'm fully supportive of it. I'm just trying to figure out in the short term between now and Denver, can we start a program with the Fiddle team that clearly like gives some level of incentive for those that, like Akave, that want to test some of these SLOs with real data on real SPs and with a leadership board that we can kind of point to, right? Because all the the dashboards are awesome, to kind of create the FOMO and also the interest of new SPs that we need in this ecosystem. Okay, great. I will be there.
So I've got an easy question for you.
Yeah.
How do I participate in this working group?
So there's a little link. It's lou.ma/phil-pmf-targets-wg. And I'll put that in the Phil Slack channel afterwards.
Or on a Telegram.
From there, it links to our Notion page, which is like all the notes have been happening and all the action items that we're tracking. But that's the easiest link to get started.
Your Spark channel?
I'll post this. We can put it in the Spark channel, but I'll also put it in the Phil Dev Summit Slack channel.
Another question over there.
Yeah.
Hey, so this may have already been asked, so sorry if it was. One question that I have, if you go back to the what's next slide.
Yeah.
So it seems like we're trending towards two different paths that to me seem like quite different. So one is like the assumption that, hey, the layer one will never be able to have enough SLAs, SLOs, SLIs embedded in it and like a quick enough process to keep building them into it. So the answer to that is those unique SLOs are or service classes are basically outsourced to the layer twos. How are we thinking about these two things at the same time? And like, Molly probably have a good answer. And there's a second part to this question, which is if we decide that we should be adding more SLOs to the layer one, like what makes us believe that that adding new SLOs will work if the current one we have isn't like selling? Like should we go depth into make one SLA work based on what we have, or go breadth and say we won't fix any issues that we see with the current one? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I don't think the people involved in the working group so far haven't been particularly opinionated there. They think we've been trying to focus on making sure that we can support multiple don't assume just one service class, and don't just assume only a couple of SLOs. Allow this to expand, but where that breaks, how that expands across L2s versus the L1, like that, there's been no thought on that. And just trying to get something end-to-end working. But like for me, a clear gap on any of these service classes, I think, is like, can you give me any, if you look at something like S3, you get some sort of guarantee on what's my time to first byte, right? That's not being exposed here at all. So that seems like a very obvious SLI that first needs to get created, then can be piggybacked on what Spark has already done, and an SLO set for that. But I think, a lot of this is like, we just need to start getting out there and find out from the people who are talking to users on like, hey, what things do users want to see measured, so that, I guess if some of the user here is the storage on-ramps and aggregators, like what things do they want to see out of SPs for being able to evaluate whether that's a good SP to work with? That should really be informing what anything else that should be getting added to service classes, or whether to create a new service class.
Oh yeah. To continue answering your question, totally agree with that. Like it's not banging our heads against a single objective until suddenly that objective works. It's talking to customers and making sure we hit the minimum viable set of objectives they care about, that it becomes a product that they're willing to pay for, that they would be very disappointed if it went away. And usually that's not being like, great, how do we just hit you over the head enough with POREP such that you eventually love it? It's more like, great, you as a client have a set of things you care about, one of which is usually I need to get my data out with some set of guarantees or some amount of latency or some number of times per year, such that I can rely on this for my needs and my data access patterns. And so we need to hit the minimum set of SLOs to meet our first set of use cases, and that becomes a service class. So the minimum set we need to hit can define the first service class that we can fully measure and guarantee to those users. And to your so that's one. We need to hit the minimum set, and then we can expand over time as we identify more and more and more service classes that we can serve with the data we're collecting and the product we have. To the other question of like, how is the thought process between L1 and L2 SLOs going to look? I think it is very much to kind of Stefan's previous point. We will and should see L2s pioneer the use of new SLIs, new product features, and over time, ones of those that are very commonly required by many L2s might land in L1, where they can then be utilized by many and have additional kind of L1 level security and support across the whole population of storage providers that are working with many different chains. Obviously, having a copy of data is one thing that L1 already does. Soon, having a hot copy of data will be a thing that L1 can offer as a primitive that many of these networks can use. We now have Spark metrics on chain, so having data that is retrievable on some level of testing is something that L1 is now able to measure, though it does not yet incentivize that, to John's point. And so I think we will see much more innovation, iteration, prototyping happening in L2, things that are broadly useful and agreed across many different service classes and many different product verticals will happen on L1. One that came up during the Hacker House last week is like, we need that location service being measured on chain in some way. And we can start out like, not all service classes are going to be as complex and robustly technical as POREP was, that took like Nicola and team, I don't even know, like 2 years to design and break and design and break and design and break and design and break, and then get this perfect thing that was all encoded into crypto primitives. It could just literally be, great, here's like a Web2 auditing system that has verified that my hardware is in this location according to this thing. Okay, cool, certificate on chain, and if we, with some collateral, like cool, good MVP, whatever. Let's kind of test that out. I think even in the L1 space of things, we'll see a lot of these things start as user space smart contracts. That's the value of having FVM. We can iterate and prototype even with L1 primitives much faster, which then can be used by multiple different L2s, like how multiple different L2s plan to use PDP, even though that's going to be a user space smart contract. And so those can also iterate and change over time. So I don't know if that hits some of your questions.
Yeah, totally. Just one more that I'm sure Molly will have an answer to as well. Sorry, but I wonder. I mean, obviously, I completely align with chatting with customers to get the things needed in the layer one. Who is that customer right now that is informing that, and like how broad does that go?
There's multiple different customers, probably depending on the service class that you're talking about. We have also done a lot of research of what the other tiers are from other storage services, because we don't have to come up with all of these off the top of our head. We can look at industry primitives that have adoption today and be like, great, what Paul did a really good job of this, looking across, what is Azure doing? What is GCP? What is AWS? What is, yada, 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 R2, Wasabi, etc. What do they have as their tiers? How can we understand the SLIs and SLOs that they are measuring and the objectives they're setting against it right now? That is a shared language that we can use with people who have purchased storage and might be an existing customer of one of those groups, to then be like, well, okay, if you move here, you get that existing service class tier, and you get on-chain verifiability, and you get a lower cost point, and you get more visibility into the robustness of your data as measured by a larger network of participants over time, instead of trusting Wasabi or AWS or whoever that they're doing what you asked with your data. And so those are that's one approach that we've been taking with it, and I guess that hits the question of like, what is going to be our process for setting initial SLIs and SLOs for those that are mostly going to be, industry acceptable, because we can't have like, at least my hypothesis is that having every client individually set a different SLO within their deal would just be way too complex and difficult for the network to. I've lost my train of thought. So cool.
Everything was amazing. I knew this was going to probably go that route. We need to add a little bit more. I think there's maybe some people that don't maybe know what Spark and Station do. So we put in a little, show us how it works, I guess, or talk to it. I haven't seen the slides, but Patrick's going to come up. Will's going to come up, show us how it's working.